The alien fleet, a sea of shimmering metal and cold, unblinking eyes, loomed in the dark expanse of space. It was vast, far larger than anything Earth had ever imagined. The invaders, known as the Cyrics, had traveled across the stars for centuries, their empire stretching across dozens of worlds. Their technology, far beyond anything humans could dream of, allowed them to conquer and enslave countless civilizations. And now, Earth was next on their list. On board the flagship, Karmari, High Commander Zarnak stood in the command chamber, his alien face expressionless as he surveyed the tactical display. Around him, his officers murmured, their voices laced with the satisfaction of victory. They had studied Earth thoroughly. The humans were primitive. Their weapons were laughable, their ships outdated, and their defenses non-existent. They had no idea what was coming. Zarnak's cold eyes narrowed as he observed the human homeworld on the view screen. Blue and green swirled across the planet, unprotected, vulnerable. It seemed almost too easy. "Commander, the fleet is in position," a subordinate reported. "We are ready to commence the first strike." Zarnak nodded, a subtle hint of amusement in his tone. "Proceed. Let's show them how small their resistance will be. The humans will bend before us in hours." The invasion was set to unfold in two phases. First, a heavy bombardment from orbit, followed by ground forces landing in key cities around the world. There was no need for subtlety. The Cyrics were an unstoppable juggernaut, and any resistance would be crushed. They would raise Earth's defenses, scatter its armies, and force the humans into submission. Back on Earth, the human governments were in full emergency mode, but there was little they could do. Global leaders met in secret, trying to coordinate their defenses, but they all knew that this wasn't just another international conflict. Earth was facing its first true alien invasion, and the odds were overwhelming. The world's militaries had launched their best ships into space, but these were outdated, their designs born of limited budgets and aging technology. The humans had no idea what they were truly up against. What the Cyrics didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that in the depths of human ingenuity, far beyond the eyes of the invaders, something else was brewing. In the shadows of secret bunkers and hidden research labs, the human race had been preparing for this moment. They had been anticipating the day the aliens would come, and they had made sure to be ready. But the Cyrics didn't care. They were so sure of their victory that they didn't even bother to scan Earth for surprises. To them, the humans were simply another weak, unimportant species to crush. They had never encountered a race that had fought back in a way that truly mattered. No one had ever dared to challenge them on such a scale. As the first wave of Cyric ships dropped into Earth's atmosphere, Zarnak's voice rang out, cold and confident. "Activate the bombardment." The Cyrics fleet unleashed its wrath. The sky above Earth began to glow with bright flashes of energy as the first blasts from the alien ships rained down on major cities. But in the midst of the destruction, something unexpected happened. Something that would forever change the course of the battle for Earth. The first strike hit Earth with terrifying precision. In moments, entire cities, New York, Tokyo, Paris, were reduced to rubble. The alien ships hovered above the planet, their massive forms blocking out the sun. Bright beams of energy sliced through the sky, turning skyscrapers into ashes, and explosions rippled across the globe. The Cyrics commanders watched as their weapons decimated Earth's defenses, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. On the surface, humans scrambled to respond. Governments issued emergency orders, military units activated, and civilians fled to underground bunkers. But for all their efforts, it seemed pointless. Against the Cyrics' overwhelming firepower, no defense could withstand such an onslaught. High Commander Zarnak watched the devastation unfold with detached satisfaction. "The humans are scrambling," he observed, his voice calm, almost bored. "Their cities are crumbling. Their resistance is as weak as anticipated." But as the destruction continued, something unexpected happened. something that made Zarnak's fingers twitch slightly in irritation. Out of nowhere, a group of human ships appeared on the radar, moving swiftly in formation. They were smaller than the Cyrix craft, their designs crude compared to the invaders' sleek, deadly ships, yet there was something unmistakable about them. Zarnak narrowed his eyes. "What are those?" A subordinate officer quickly analyzed the incoming signal. "Unknown ships. They're not part of any human fleet we've detected. They're coordinating their movements. It's almost as if they're acting in unison." The Cyrix fleet had assumed that Earth's spacefaring capabilities were years behind our own, and they were correct, on paper. Yet, what the aliens didn't know was that Earth had been preparing for something like this for years. A covert operation had been underway for decades, a secret alliance of nations pooling resources, sharing knowledge, and developing technology in response to the possibility of an alien threat. What Zarnak didn't understand was that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its ships, but its resilience, its resourcefulness. The human fleet that now emerged was a combination of military might, ingenuity, and a never-give-up attitude. The alien flagship fired a warning shot across the path of the human ships, sending a wave of energy that crackled through space. "They dare to approach us." Zarnak sneered. "Engage them. Make an example of them." But as the Cyrix fleet unleashed their firepower, the humans responded in ways the aliens had not prepared for. The human ships didn't engage in direct combat. Instead, they danced through space with unnerving agility, darting and weaving, like bees avoiding a swatter. Some ships would surge forward, only to disappear into space's void, only to reappear moments later with precise laser strikes aimed at weak points in the Cyrix ships. The Cyrix commanders were left reeling. These humans were unpredictable. Where they should have been scattered, they were unified. Where they should have fled, they fought back. It wasn't just their ships that were causing damage. It was the humans themselves, who seemed to know exactly how to use their environment to their advantage. Earth's orbit, its gravity wells, even its moon were part of their battlefield. Zarnak clenched his fists, unable to conceal his frustration. "This is impossible. How can they move like this? Their technology, it's rudimentary at best, and yet they fight with purpose." The human ships continued to press their advantage, inflicting minor but significant damage on the alien fleet. It wasn't enough to halt the invasion, but it was enough to send a message. The aliens had expected easy prey, and instead, they faced an enemy that had refused to surrender. Back on Earth, the world's military leaders watched in stunned silence as their ships, long considered underpowered, held their ground against the seemingly invincible Cyrix fleet. In bunkers and command centers, whispers of hope began to spread. "This isn't over," one commander said, his voice steady. "We can fight back." Zarnak's face twisted into a snarl. He was unaccustomed to being challenged, and this unexpected resistance fueled a deep, growing anger within him. The Cyrix were not accustomed to failure. Yet here, on Earth, they were facing something they hadn't anticipated. A species that would not bow. The battle raged above Earth as the Cyrix fleet tried to regain control. Their ships, massive and deadly, continued to unleash devastating blasts. But the humans, smaller, seemingly outmatched, had proven more than capable of avoiding their wrath. Each maneuver from the human ships was unexpected, each strike calculated, leaving the invaders reeling. Commander Zarnak paced nervously in his command room, his face contorted in frustration. His fleet had suffered losses, and it was clear that the humans weren't just desperate. They were resourceful. They had turned their orbital stations into weapons, using Earth's gravity wells to slingshot their ships into unpredictable trajectories. The Cyrix weapons, designed for more direct combat, struggled to adapt. "Why are they so difficult to track?" one of Zarnak's officers asked, a trace of panic in his voice. "They're using tactics we've never encountered. It's as though they're toying with us." Zarnak's patience was wearing thin. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. I don't care if they're toying with us. Bring down their ships. Now." Meanwhile, the human fleet was nowhere near ready to give up. Each commander, no matter their rank or experience, was fighting with everything they had, driven not just by the need to protect their families, but by the realization that this was their one chance to prove something, their very survival. In a small command center located beneath the mountains in Colorado, General Robert Ferris was leading the Earth Coalition's military response. His face was illuminated by a holographic display showing real-time battle data. His eyes narrowed as he studied the movements of the Cyrex ships. He had been trained for this moment, even if he hadn't known it would come in the form of an alien invasion. What the aliens didn't know was that humanity's years of secrecy had given them the advantage of surprise. "We've got them," General Ferris muttered, almost to himself. "We just need to push harder." He turned to his lead strategist, Lieutenant Commander Jessica Mason. "What do you have for me?" She quickly analyzed the data on her own screen. "We've noticed a pattern in their attacks. They're relying on their heavy firepower, thinking we'll fight like traditional armies. But that's their mistake. If we outsmart them and keep them on the defensive, they won't be able to maintain their advantage." Ferris smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Then let's show them exactly how we fight." And fight they did. The humans pushed forward with a renewed sense of determination. Their ships, though smaller and seemingly inferior in firepower, were nimble, agile, and relentless. A human fleet led by Captain Sarah Calloway, one of the most experienced pilots in the Earth fleet, executed a daring attack on an alien cruiser, exploiting a flaw in its energy shield that the Cyrex had overlooked. The human ship swooped in close, dropping a series of explosive charges into weak points, causing a violent explosion that sent debris scattering into space. The Cyrex, stunned by the loss, scrambled to regroup. For every alien ship that fell, more human ships appeared, each maneuvering with calculated precision. The humans weren't relying solely on brute force. They were exploiting every advantage their smaller, lighter ships had, using Earth's own resources to tip the scales in their favor. But it wasn't just their ships that were turning the tide. It was the unbreakable spirit of humanity. On the surface, citizens from all walks of life were stepping up. Hackers and engineers were racing to upgrade satellites to send real-time data to the military. Former astronauts were being recalled, ready to engage in the fight they had once trained for, but never imagined they would have to use. Across the world, humanity was united in a way that it never had been before. In a matter of hours, the human race had transformed from an unsuspecting, divided species into a collective force driven by sheer survival. In the midst of the chaos, Zarnak's confidence was slipping. The humans were adapting, changing the course of the battle with each passing moment. He could see it now. Their fight wasn't just about technology. It was about their refusal to surrender. "They're like cockroaches," he spat, seething with frustration. "No matter how many we kill, they keep coming back. This should have been easy. Why aren't they giving up?" "We underestimated them," one of his officers admitted, the truth dawning on him. "Their will to survive is stronger than we thought, and their ability to adapt, it's unlike anything we've seen." Zarnak stood motionless for a moment, his thoughts racing. The Cyrex had faced countless species in their conquests, and they had crushed every one without mercy. But these humans, they were different. They were proving to be a challenge unlike any the Cyrex had anticipated. "We will not lose," Zarnak finally growled, his voice filled with anger. "Prepare the second wave. We'll crush them for good." But Zarnak couldn't shake the feeling that Earth's defenders were only just getting started, and that his overconfidence might be his undoing. The Cyrex fleet, now reeling from the unexpected resistance, tried to regroup. Their commanders quickly shifted tactics, calling for a full-scale counterattack, determined to crush the human defiance once and for all. Zarnak's patience had worn thin, and the frustration of dealing with a race so unpredictable gnawed at him. He would not tolerate another delay. The humans had embarrassed him, embarrassed the Cyrex. And that was something he couldn't ignore. The order came swiftly. Initiate Phase 2. Unleash the full power of our fleet. No more playing games. Wipe them out. Across the battlefield, the Cyrex ships powered up their weapons. Their massive energy cannons, capable of obliterating entire cities in seconds, charged with deadly intensity. The Cyrex had underestimated the humans' ability to evade and survive. But now, they would overwhelm them with pure firepower. The first wave of destruction hit Earth's orbit hard. Massive energy beams erupted from the alien ships, burning through the human fleets and vaporizing space stations in their path. The humans, outnumbered and outgunned, found themselves under the full force of the Cyrex might. It was a relentless bombardment, shockwaves of energy rippling through space as entire fleets were torn apart, scattered into debris. Human ships disintegrated in bright flashes, their fragile frames no match for the overwhelming firepower. But the humans didn't back down. They refused to falter. Captain Sarah Calloway's ship, Peregrine, darted and weaved through the onslaught, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. Her knuckles gripped the control panel, sweat dripping down her forehead. She had lost good pilots in the skirmishes earlier, and the pressure was building. She knew that this was a pivotal moment. If they didn't fight back with everything they had, they wouldn't survive. Focus on their engines, she barked into the comms. If we take down their power sources, we can break their momentum. Her ship shot forward, weaving between the larger Cyrex cruisers. With pinpoint accuracy, Peregrine fired a volley of high-impact missiles toward the alien cruiser in front of her. The Cyrex ship reeled as its outer hull was damaged, its weapons momentarily flickering. It was enough to slow the massive vessel down. Just enough. Behind her, more human ships followed suit, their smaller forms darting in and out of enemy fire, taking calculated risks to destroy the Cyrex fleet's momentum. They were no longer playing defensively. They were fighting back, striking at the heart of the invaders' power. The humans had learned something valuable in the past hours of battle. The Cyrex, though advanced, were predictable. Their overwhelming firepower was their strength, but it was also their weakness. They relied too much on brute force, too little on adaptability. On the Cyrex flagship Karmori, Zarnak growled in frustration. His fleet was being dismantled piece by piece. Though they still outnumbered the humans, the unpredictability of their tactics was wreaking havoc on his forces. The human fleet wasn't just fighting. They were exploiting weaknesses, outwitting their opponents at every turn. Zarnak's patience finally snapped. Enough, he shouted. Target their command ships. Focus all firepower on their flagship. The orders were carried out instantly. The Cyrex flagship's main energy cannon powered up, a terrifying pulse of energy building to its full potential. The human fleet had a few moments to react. General Ferris, watching the live feeds of the space battle from his command center on Earth, knew what was coming. They're going for the Lysander, he muttered under his breath. The Lysander was Earth's flagship, the heart of the human fleet. It was heavily defended, but against the sheer scale of Cyrex firepower, it might not be enough. The Cyrex were no longer taking chances. They were going for the kill. Deploy all fighter squadrons to protect the Lysander, Ferris ordered. All ships, fall back, and create a shield around it. We're not losing that ship. On board the Lysander, Captain Emily Brooks watched as the Cyrex ships closed in, their weapons glowing menacingly. Brace for impact, she called, her voice calm but tense. In the distance, the Cyrex flagship fired. A blinding bolt of energy shot through space, streaking toward the human flagship. The Lysander's shields flared, struggling to hold under the force of the attack. For a moment, it seemed like the shield would fail. But then, just as the energy blast was about to strike, the fleet's fighters swarmed in, diverting the blast, absorbing some of the impact. The blast was devastating, but it wasn't enough to break the Lysander. The ship's hull groaned under the pressure, but it held together. Damage report, Captain Brooks barked. The officers scrambled to assess the ship's integrity. "Shields down to 30%, Captain. Engines are functional. We can still fight," one of the engineers called out. "Good," Brooks replied, her voice steady. "We're not done yet. Bring us in closer to the Cyrix flagship. Time to hit them where it hurts." The human fleet rallied behind her, pushing forward with renewed vigor. The Cyrix had underestimated humanity's will to fight, and they were paying for it. As the humans regrouped and launched their counterattack, Zarnak's face twisted in rage. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, he began to realize something. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. The battle above Earth had reached a fever pitch. The Cyrix fleet, once confident in their overwhelming superiority, was beginning to buckle under the relentless persistence of the human forces. They had thrown everything they had at Earth, and still, the humans refused to break. Each time a ship fell, another seemed to rise in its place, their pilots pushing themselves beyond the limits of reason and endurance. Commander Zarnak's fury was palpable. The humans' ability to adapt, to fight back with a blend of courage and cunning, had caught him off guard. Their ships, once considered inadequate, were now proving to be an invaluable asset. His fleet had taken heavy losses, but it was the psychological toll, the realization that these humans would not give up, that stung the hardest. "We need a new plan," Zarnak muttered through clenched teeth, pacing back and forth in his command center. The explosion from the human fleet's counterattack had left him rattled. "Their forces are more resilient than we anticipated. Every time we deal a blow, they come back stronger." One of his subordinates stepped forward, clearly concerned. "Commander, we still have the advantage in firepower. We can focus our efforts on orbital bombardment, take out the human leadership in their command centers. If we destroy their coordination, we'll break their will." Zarnak stopped and stared at the officer, his expression cold. "Orbital bombardment has already begun. We've been bombing their cities for hours. It has not had the desired effect. They still fight on. It's their will that is the problem, not the weaponry. If we don't find a way to break their spirit, they will continue to resist, and we will lose." He turned to his tactical officer. "We must get to their heart. The Lysander is their flagship. If we can destroy it, we'll cripple their command structure. Target the Lysander. Direct all remaining firepower on that ship." Meanwhile, on Earth, the tide of the battle was far from decided. General Ferris watched the live feeds from his command center as the Lysander's shields began to flicker under the onslaught. The Cyrix were relentless, but so were the humans. It had been hours since the invasion began, and every moment felt like a lifetime. But Ferris knew one thing for certain. The Cyrix weren't invincible. They were simply overconfident. "Captain, status report," Ferris demanded, his voice steady even as the ground beneath him seemed to shake from the impacts in orbit. "Shields are holding at 25%, General," Captain Brooks' voice crackled over the intercom. "We've lost several squadrons in the last engagement, but we're still operational. However, if they hit us with another blast like the last one, we'll be done." Ferris clenched his fists. Losing the Lysander would be disastrous. It was the heart of the human fleet, the symbol of their resistance. Without it, the human forces might collapse. "We need to buy you some time, Captain," Ferris said, his mind racing. "Deploy everything we have left. Reinforce the Lysander at all costs. The rest of the fleet will follow in a protective formation." In orbit, the remaining human ships rallied together, their formation shifting into a defensive blockade around the Lysander. Fighters darted between the larger cruisers, swarming around the Cyrix ships like angry hornets. They couldn't match the Cyrix's firepower, but they could match their will, their refusal to back down. The Cyrix flagship, Karmori, loomed larger in the distance as it closed in on the Lysander. Zarnak's orders echoed through the communications network, commanding his fleet to deliver a final, decisive strike. The colossal energy cannons of the Cyrix ships charged once more, crackling with devastating power. Just as Zarnak was about to give the final order to fire, a new signal blipped on his screen, a message from his scouting ships. "Commander," one of the officers said, voice trembling, "we're detecting something strange. It's coming from Earth. A new fleet. It's moving toward us." Zarnak's eyes narrowed. Impossible. There's no way they could have. Before he could finish his sentence, the signal intensified. More human ships, smaller but quicker than anything the Cyrex had faced before, emerged from the shadows of Earth's moon. They appeared suddenly, as if they had been waiting for the right moment to strike. General Ferris's voice came through the comms. "You underestimated us, Commander Zarnak. This is Earth's last surprise." From the shadows of the moon, a fleet of specially designed stealth ships, human-made with cloaking technology they had developed secretly, launched into the fray. They were unlike any of the alien ships the Cyrex had encountered. Smaller, more agile, and faster than anything the Cyrex had anticipated, they struck at the Cyrex's weakest points with deadly accuracy, avoiding the brunt of the alien fleet's counterattacks. The humans' hidden fleet had arrived. The sudden appearance of Earth's hidden fleet sent shockwaves through the Cyrex command structure. Zarnak's eyes widened as the new human ships, sleek and fast, slipped through the chaos of battle like shadows, undetected by his fleet until it was too late. His tactical officers scrambled to adjust, but the damage was already done. The humans had exploited their surprise advantage perfectly. "These ships weren't on any of our scans," one of Zarnak's officers stammered. "They must have been hidden, possibly even constructed in secret." "Of course they were hidden," Zarnak growled, his frustration palpable. "The humans have been preparing for this. They knew we would come. They've played us for fools." The new human fleet, made up of stealth ships equipped with advanced cloaking technology, launched a brutal offensive. With their smaller size and advanced evasion tactics, they weaved in and out of the Cyrex lines, striking with precision at the alien fleet's most vulnerable areas. Energy conduits, shield generators, and weapons arrays. Unlike the larger human ships, these stealth units were designed for surgical strikes, using their speed to disable rather than destroy, causing chaos and confusion among the Cyrex forces. General Ferris's voice crackled over the comms, filled with quiet confidence. "Zarnak, you're not the only one who can plan for the unexpected. We've been preparing for this for years. It's time we made you regret underestimating humanity." Back on Earth, civilians and military personnel alike watched in awe as the tide of the battle shifted. The newly revealed fleet was a game-changer. And it wasn't just the technology, it was the message it sent. The human race, once thought to be helpless, had an ace up its sleeve. The Cyrex may have been powerful, but the humans had been planning, adapting, and waiting for this moment to strike back. On the Lysander, Captain Emily Brooks was already giving orders. "Our shields are holding, but we can't maintain this forever. We need to move. All ships, focus on defensive maneuvers. Protect the stealth fleet while they disable the Cyrex flagship." Her crew nodded in acknowledgement, their faces set in grim determination. The Lysander had taken a beating, but it was far from finished. Now, with the addition of the stealth fleet, the humans had a fighting chance. Brooks knew they couldn't waste any more time. The Cyrex flagship was still their primary target. If they could cripple it, they could win the battle, and perhaps the war. Zarnak, however, wasn't about to admit defeat. His anger simmered as his fleet began to retaliate against the new human ships. The Cyrex flagship Karmari powered up its weapon systems, unleashing a barrage of energy fire to neutralize the stealth ships. But the humans were already one step ahead, using their cloaking devices to slip past the attacks and strike at the Cyrex's exposed weak points. The stealth fleet was playing its role perfectly, drawing the Cyrex's attention away from the real threat. The Cyrex, too accustomed to victory, were struggling to adapt. Their massive firepower was proving ineffective against the nimble human ships, and each time they concentrated their weapons on one group, another appeared out of nowhere to exploit their vulnerabilities. Zarnak's frustration boiled over. I want those ships destroyed, now. Bring the full force of the fleet to bear on the Lysander. If we cannot defeat them here, we will lose everything. On the battlefield, the humans pressed their advantage, using their hidden fleet to create chaos and disarray among the Cyrix ranks. The once confident alien fleet, now disjointed and unsure, found itself on the defensive for the first time. The humans had successfully neutralized their advantage in numbers, and the Cyrix began to feel the weight of their miscalculations. But Zarnak was not one to back down easily. With a final desperate order, he commanded a full-scale offensive. The Cyrix ships began to converge on the Lysander, focusing all their remaining firepower on the human flagship. The Lysander was the key to humanity's success, and the Cyrix were willing to sacrifice everything to ensure it was destroyed. General Ferris, watching the unfolding events from Earth, clenched his fists. Captain, they're coming for you. You need to move, now. Captain Brooks's voice was calm but determined. Understood, General. We're not backing down. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. As the Lysander moved to dodge the incoming fire, the hidden fleet continued to strike from the shadows, disabling Cyrix cruisers and creating openings in their defenses. It was clear that the Cyrix were no longer in control. The momentum had shifted, and it was the humans who were driving the battle now. In space, amid the chaos and destruction, Zarnak stared at the screens in disbelief. The humans were winning. They had taken everything he had thrown at them and had turned it against him. He could feel his hold on the situation slipping away. Every move he made seemed to play directly into humanity's hands. For the first time since the invasion began, he wasn't sure if victory was within his grasp. Prepare for the final assault, Zarnak muttered to his officers, his voice cold and calculated. We may have underestimated them, but we will not lose. This battle will be ours. But as the Cyrix fleet closed in for another attack, Zarnak couldn't shake the growing doubt that perhaps the humans weren't as weak as they had believed. Perhaps, in their desperation, they had found strength that no one had ever expected. The Cyrix flagship Carmery loomed ominously, its massive form casting a shadow over the remaining human fleet. But the tables had turned. Where once the Cyrix had commanded the skies, the humans now controlled the flow of battle, their hidden fleet disrupting every attempt by the Cyrix to regain dominance. Zarnak seethed in his command chamber, watching the battle unfold on multiple screens. His fleet was in disarray, no longer a cohesive force, but a series of isolated ships desperately trying to hold their ground. The Lysander, battered but still standing, had proven to be far more resilient than he'd anticipated. Worse, the stealth ships continued to dart in and out of his lines, exploiting every vulnerability and striking with surgical precision. This cannot continue, Zarnak growled, his fist slamming against the console in front of him. We will crush them. We have no choice. He turned to his officers. Prepare the final assault. We will use everything we have left. No more hesitation. We will break them, or we will die trying. The order was issued, and the Cyrix fleet began to converge on the human flagship. Their energy cannons powered up. Their shields crackled with volatile energy. This was it. The last push. Zarnak's fleet was ready to pour every ounce of firepower they had into the Lysander and finish what they had started. On board the Lysander, Captain Emily Brooks watched the incoming Cyrix ships with a calm demeanor, though her heart was pounding in her chest. They had survived this long, but it was clear the Cyrix were about to make their final, most desperate assault. We've fought hard, and we've held the line, Captain Brooks said, her voice steady. Now, it's time to end this. We push forward. Captain, our shields are down to 10%, one of her officers reported. We're still taking hits, and we're running low on energy reserves. We can't take another direct hit. Brooks nodded. We'll keep moving. We've come this far. We're not stopping now. She ordered the ship into a sharp maneuver, diving toward the heart of the Cyrix formation. The Lysander lurched forward, its remaining engines groaning under the strain. The human ships followed, forming up behind it in a protective formation, determined to give their flagship the support it needed. They were pushing everything into this final push. Their remaining fighters, their last reserves of ammunition, and their unyielding will to survive. The Cyrix fleet focused their fire on the Lysander, their massive cannons lighting up the void with brilliant, destructive beams of energy. But the humans weren't sitting still. They were weaving through the barrage, their agility proving to be their most effective weapon. Suddenly, the stealth ships broke away from the fringes of the battle, darting toward the Cyrix flagship with a renewed sense of urgency. Their cloaking devices shimmered as they reappeared, just a few kilometers from the Carmary. They had one target, the Cyrix command center. Zarnak watched in horror as the stealth ships closed in on his flagship. "No, destroy them," he shouted, slamming his fist down on the console. "We cannot let them reach the core." But the human ships had already begun their strike. With pinpoint precision, the stealth fleet launched a volley of high-impact missiles that detonated near the Carmary's energy cores. The Cyrix flagship shuddered violently as the explosions ripped through its lower hull. It was a critical hit, damaging the core systems and sending waves of energy rippling through the structure. The Carmary's defensive systems struggled to keep up, but the human ships had already done their job. The Cyrix flagship was now vulnerable. "Target their engines," Captain Brooks ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos of the battlefield. "All remaining ships, aim for the Carmary. It's now or never." The remaining human ships concentrated their fire on the Cyrix flagship, their energy weapons blasting into the weakened hull. The Cyrix flagship began to tremble, its once proud silhouette now a shadow of its former self. Sparks flew from ruptured conduits, and sections of the ship were blown apart as the human assault pushed forward. Inside the Carmary, Zarnak fought to maintain control. He had watched his fleet fall apart, one ship at a time, but he would not surrender. "Prepare the final weapon," he shouted. "If we cannot win, we will destroy them all." The orders were given to power up the Carmary's ultimate weapon, a super weapon capable of obliterating the human fleet in a single shot. The weapon's energy began to build, its hum vibrating through the deck, growing louder and more intense by the second. But the humans had one final surprise. From the depths of the battle, a fresh wave of human ships emerged, led by the newly repaired Phoenix, a symbol of humanity's resilience. The ship, once thought lost after an earlier attack, had been brought back online by an engineering team working tirelessly in the background. The Phoenix's weapons locked onto the Carmary, and with one final barrage, it struck the Cyrix flagship with a devastating salvo. The Carmary's superweapon exploded in a massive burst of energy, but the human fleet's precision strikes had crippled the ship just in time. The flagship of the Cyrix fleet, the heart of their invasion, was destroyed. The remaining Cyrix ships hesitated, unsure of their next move. The loss of their flagship was a devastating blow. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, and now they were paying the price. The destruction of the Carmary sent shockwaves through the Cyrix fleet. In the void of space, where once the enemy's arrogance had reigned supreme, an eerie silence settled. The flagship, symbolic of their might and unyielding confidence, was gone. It was the death knell of the Cyrix invasion. Zarnak's eyes widened in disbelief as his screen flashed with the catastrophic damage to his ship. The Carmary was no longer a weapon of terror. It was a burning husk, its shattered remains drifting in the cold silence of space. "No," Zarnak whispered, barely able to comprehend the scale of the loss. His hands trembled as he reached for the controls. "This cannot be the end. We still have strength. We have enough firepower to finish them off." But his words lacked conviction. His fleet, once formidable and unstoppable, was in disarray. Ships had been destroyed, scattered, or left in retreat. The remaining Cyrix forces lacked the unity and coordination that had made them such a dangerous foe. The humans, with their tenacity and relentless spirit, had broken their ranks, and now they were closing in for the final strike. General Ferris's voice crackled over the comms, clear and resolute. "Commander Zarnak, you've lost. Your flagship is destroyed. Your fleet is fractured. Surrender now, and we'll guarantee the safety of your crew." Zarnak's chest heaved with fury and disbelief. "You dare speak of surrender? We will never bow to humans." His tone was a bitter mix of anger and despair. "We will die before we yield." The remaining Cyrix ships, those still operational, began to gather, forming a last-ditch defensive line around their remaining vessels. They would make their stand now, throwing everything they had at the humans. It was a final gamble, a desperate play to salvage some semblance of victory from the jaws of defeat. But the humans were not about to let them escape. Captain Brooks, her resolve unshaken despite the damage to the Lysander, issued her orders. "All ships, full assault. We take them down now." The remaining human ships, now bolstered by their reinvigorated fleet, surged forward like a wave crashing over a weakened dam. The stealth fleet continued its lightning-fast strikes, targeting vulnerable Cyrix warships, while the human flagships and cruisers laid down a devastating barrage of firepower. The air was thick with the sound of energy blasts, and the sky above Earth became a canvas of destruction. The Cyrix, outnumbered and outmatched, fought with all the fury they had left, but their efforts were futile. The human ships pressed on, slowly chipping away at their defenses. With each blast, another Cyrix ship fell, and with every moment that passed, the hope of victory for the invaders shrank. Zarnak ordered a final desperate move. He activated the Karmari's self-destruct sequence, a last-ditch effort to take down the human fleet with him. But it was already too late. Before the countdown could finish, a series of well-placed strikes from the human fleet slammed into the command center of the Karmari, causing a catastrophic failure in the ship's core systems. The ship's self-destruct mechanism malfunctioned, and in its place, a chain reaction of explosions erupted across the entire Cyrix line. The shockwave of the Karmari's destruction spread like wildfire, engulfing the remaining Cyrix ships. One by one, the enemy vessels began to break apart, their engines failing, their shields collapsing. The once mighty invasion force was disintegrating, and in the wreckage, only a handful of Cyrix ships managed to limp away, retreating into the void. The battle was over. General Ferris stood before a sea of screens, his eyes fixed on the final moments of the Cyrix fleet. "We've won," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "We've really won." On the Lysander, Captain Brooks exhaled, her body aching from the stress of battle. She had watched so many good people fall, so many ships destroyed. But they had held the line. They had fought back, and now they were victorious. "Bring us home," Brooks ordered, her voice soft yet resolute. The human fleet, though battered and weary, had won the impossible. Earth had stood its ground against an overwhelming invader, and humanity had proven to the universe that it was not to be underestimated. The retreating Cyrix ships vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a battlefield littered with the wreckage of their once unstoppable fleet. The humans, against all odds, had turned the tide and claimed a hard-earned victory. But while the battle was over, the scars of the conflict would remain, on Earth, on the hearts of the survivors, and in the minds of those who had witnessed humanity's courage. They had faced an existential threat and triumphed. But one question lingered in the air. The Cyrix were gone, but what else lay beyond the stars, waiting for the humans to face?